Hello everyone, welcome to CampusLink. I am Lupo, and today I'm welcoming David Almiger, who is, among many things, the co-founder of Probe, a psychedelic research association in Switzerland for students specifically to spread the word about the clinical uses of psychedelics. And he's also been studying psychology for 5 years, and he's the graphic designer for Alps, right? Correct?
Yes, that is
Alright.
correct.
And we are here to have a conversation about the psychedelic renaissance and some of the things that we find interesting in this space. And I'm fascinated by this subject because of how many situations it can treat in terms of PTSD, depression, alcoholism. I think this is fascinating. And now the FDA is also just released the guide actually on how to design these clinical trials. Did you see that? Like I think one week ago or something like that.
I didn't see the guide, but I saw that they labeled several therapies with psychedelics as breakthrough therapies.
Breakthrough therapies, yeah, exactly, which is
Yes.
fascinating because before that they were like the worst substances, nobody
Definitely.
could touch that, fully illegal. But now it's like, okay, if you research this, we will give you unlimited
Yes.
amounts of money. So
Actually, in the US, there's this funny story. I actually, at the introduction speech I had at a conference in May, I used that as well. So Rick Strassman in the US, when he did the first psychedelic research with humans after 20 years of no research because of the war on drugs, he had to apply to the FDA and everything, of course, to do that research. And it was so difficult. Like in his book, DMT, the Spirits Molecule, he writes about it. And now the same organization, the Food and Drug Administration, just calls psychedelic therapies breakthrough therapies,
yeah.
meaning that they're under the most promising therapies under development.
Yeah, that's amazing, how much it can change if they
Exactly.
I think we can thank a lot for associations like MAPS and, for example, Joe Rogan, I think also in terms of the cultural understanding of it. And Michael Pollan, of course, who wrote the book and the Netflix series. So there's a lot of interesting things happening. Tell me a little bit about your process of starting the association in Bern, right?
Yes, definitely.
What was the process and the thought behind that?
Yeah, you have to imagine that I was already interested in the topic of psychedelics before starting to study psychology. And then I think that this short little story illustrates it best. I was sitting in a clinical lecture about clinical psychology. And then I asked the lecturer, who is a good lecturer, a renowned psychotherapist and researcher and so on, and I respect her deeply as well. Asked her about psychedelics and therapy with psychedelics, and she couldn't tell me anything about it because she hardly knew anything about it. And I was like such a shock because that was the point where I realized that maybe I was going to study psychology for 5 years and not really have any opportunities to learn about psychedelics, psychedelic research, psychedelic therapy during those studies, which is in a way ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, yeah.
What
I
else?
also feel that for you. Like,
You know what I mean? Like, what else would you be studying to learn about those things than psychology? But and then at the end of my bachelor's, my friend Pascal and I, we found a student association in the French-speaking part of Switzerland that just started doing this. So basically the idea is to provide what the university fails to provide. Just like creating yourself lectures, talks, discussions, movie nights, anything basically, sharing that research that the university doesn't teach.
Yeah.
And then we both for the masters moved to a different university and started this similar thing ourselves because it didn't exist yet in Bern.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to also like spread the word on this topic. And I can also see the problem of the, they say education never really catches up to the true like research because it's always, there's new research papers coming out all the time, and they have to update the education. And just like true research also doesn't catch up to the actual things that is going on. Like I can tell you an example, for example, in physiology, sports performance, the best tactics are all the time with the teams who are most invested in these practices, right? Because they need the results now in that season. They don't have time to wait for a 5 years research. So if they hear something, they are willing to try it. And then there's a lot of adaptations that are going on, that are faster than the actual clinical results. And I think psychedelics are also somewhat like this, although we have a lot of results already, but it's still not implemented at all. Although I know Rick Doblin says that MDMA therapy will be legal in like 1 or 2 years in the US, which is incredible, I think.
It is incredible. He has been saying that for a while, I think. But MDMA for PTSD is, well, the only field that has phase 3 clinical studies being done with psychedelics, which is incredible.
What do you know about that specifically?
I don't know that much about it, but just the fact that well, phase 3 clinical studies is just the best evidence you can basically get. It means large, human, big, and well-controlled studies. So it's just the most researched therapy, and it's also the best therapy we have. I would argue to say that it's the best therapy we have for PTSD. And a lot of people sometimes claim that psychedelics are dangerous, and of course they have to be treated with respect and everything. But there's actually more and more studies coming out showing that it may be safer than most other treatments even.
Right.
So, like it's actually the opposite in a lot of times. That actually other treatments may be less safe or more dangerous than psychedelic therapy.
Right. And, with antidepressants or all this, you're hooked on a pill for like years maybe.
Yeah, maybe you even struggle to get off of them. Maybe they don't help much, but you can get addicted to them as well.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with benzos like Xanax or something like that. You can.
Yes.
And you can also die from the withdrawal and all that. So it's really horrifying.
It's crazy that those substances are still
considered the best.
And regularly given as prescribed as medication.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a lot of money with that. So I think we have the answer to why they give it to people.
That is one of the big problems with the psychedelic therapy field.
Yeah. I think also because the big pharma will not be able to monetize it.
Yes.
You know that they are looking into how they can make compounds that are psilocybin, for example, but they are not psychoactive, like they are not psychedelic, just the results, which I think is impossible.
Mm-hmm. No, I didn't know.
But they are trying actively. A lot of money is being invested into this to find a compound that is similar to it, but doesn't produce the hallucinogenic, like the hallucinations and this type of things. But going back to the, you said that PTSD is like, for that, the treatment that involves psychedelic assisted therapy is the best therapy out there right now. And Andrew Huberman, for example, he talks about this as well a lot on his podcast nowadays, especially in the last 2 months. He had episodes on MDMA, psilocybin, and all kinds of things. And he mentioned that these therapies, they radically outperform any other therapies out there. So he also agrees with this being the case, that for specific things like PTSD, depression, especially like, for example, treatment-resistant depression with ketamine and these type of things, they are outperforming everything that is available.
Yeah.
So I think it's really fascinating. What are some of the things that you guys are trying to spread with Probe? And also, can you tell a little bit about ALPS? What are these two associations?
Yes, exactly. I told a little story about Probe before, how we founded it. And the idea is exactly what I already mentioned, to provide access to this research that exists and is being done at universities for students. And ALPS also was founded by founders of another student association. And it has the same goal, but more to the general public and to professionals, to therapists, to researchers themselves. So it's more, the big thing that we've been doing for years now is the ALPS conference, which is once every year. It will be in October this year. And the last 2 years, there were around or below 200 attendees, and this year it will be above. And there are speakers, international speakers, researchers from different research fields, a lot of therapists as well.
Okay.
And
so it's like the cutting edge of what is going on right now.
It's the biggest academic conference in Switzerland when it comes to psychedelics. And Switzerland
is big in psychedelics.
It's also one of the leading countries, yeah. When you look at the 100 most cited papers in psychedelics in the last decades, it's the second country, right after the US.
The US. Awesome. It's pretty big there then. especially because I think also Hoffman, you know, is
yes, we have a very special, unique place in that research field, because if you consider, like if you look at those data of how well Switzerland is performing and how many studies are done and how many therapists we have and so on, well, then we're doing good. But if you consider how small Switzerland is, if you look at how few universities and research facilities we actually have, it's even more impressive, because it's very, in most other research fields, this wouldn't be possible or very rare.
I think it was mainly or partially possible because you guys were so liberal about being able to research this. And I think other countries, naturally, it was really hard. I think the UK is getting now there to also facilitate a lot of research, but it's still very difficult. Like, for example, in my country, Hungary, I don't think you could ever say, I want to research psilocybin. I want to give people magic mushrooms. They will be like, what the fuck are you even talking about?
I partly agree, but I think I also have to disagree, because it's still, well, in a way maybe liberal, but it's also its own little bubble, and it's very specific at what is allowed, which type of therapies are allowed, and which type of research.
Okay.
For example,
you are aware of this then? Like, what are the constraints? You can talk about this, like how
some of the
research and what is going on in Switzerland, anything that comes to mind.
Yeah. So for therapies, there is the licensed use. There's a medical use program, which is very special for Switzerland, especially because we also do psychedelic assisted group therapy, not only individual. And this may actually be better for people. I can go about that later, but let me first finish this point about, for every individual patient, you have to write a request to the National Health Institute, and it has to be specifically for a specific substance that is allowed with a specific treatment. So it would be psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, or LSD, or MDMA for PTSD. So it's very specific. And then, for example, in treatment-resistant depression, treatment-resistant means that the patients already went through
for years.
They've went through other therapies, so treatment-resistant, and they didn't work. So it's actually the worst cases, you know. And even then, you still have to write a request for every single patient, being like, oh, this patient is eligible for this therapy because...
you have to write a whole letter about everyone.
Exactly.
Like, what did they went through and all that. It's a lot of complications. And you are also right, because they are getting the worst patients. So the fact that they are achieving these kind of results is even more impressive.
Exactly. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. And the results will probably be way better if we just did more of those treatments and earlier on, and if it was just like possible to do it in more different fields and make also the research and the therapy easier. So maybe we're still more progressive, more liberal compared to some other countries, but there's still much room for improvement.
Still,
Yes.
No, I see what you mean. Yeah. And what are some of the projects going on in Switzerland right now? The bigger research papers that you know of?
There's some non-clinical studies happening with LSD in Fribourg mainly that I know of, but there's also pharmahuasca is being studied. So this is it's basically the synthetic recreation of ayahuasca. So without the ritual setting, but there's this big debate about if it's still the same thing. So it's called pharmahuasca instead of ayahuasca.
And it is a debate, I think, like, what is it? Is it actually the same or no? Because the active component might be the same, but there's a lot of other things involved also.
Exactly.
And the ceremony, the ritual, the shaman doing the the mantras and the chants and all that. I think there's a lot of things involved, not just the compound itself.
And also they use, there's so many different ways of producing ayahuasca, but they use usually a lot of different things, and maybe every brew is a bit different.
Yeah.
And the synthetic version doesn't include the compounds that are
exactly the
only the psychedelic ones.
Interesting.
So only the DMT basically, and the MAO inhibitor, which makes the DMT possible to be absorbed basically.
Okay.
Because otherwise you would have to smoke it, and then it only acts for a very short period of time.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things we can go into. I think especially if you're thinking of from the beginner's perspective, like
Yes.
what is LSD, what is ayahuasca, what are some of the things involved in that, what is this form of ayahuasca. We can also talk about the research that you are talking about, that they are researching something with this. What is exactly that? And then we can also dive into like LSD, Hoffman, and there's a lot of ways we can go.
There is definitely a lot of ways we can go. About this specific research, I don't know enough to go much more into detail with it. There's also DMT research happening in Switzerland, but I mean that's related to ayahuasca because the active compound of ayahuasca is also DMT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is that, if you know of anything?
DMT is one of the most intense psychedelics in the way that it allows people, not everyone, but a lot of people, if they have a so-called breakthrough, to make the experience to basically be in a completely different world, independent from this one, and sometimes to meet entities there, which is such a, like, this opens doors for so many things, theories and anything, and we still have no idea what this is and what it means.
But it's true that everybody who takes, like, gets this breakthrough and enter the DMT realm, they are seeing the same shit, the same entities,
exactly.
Talking with the same, green elves or whatever.
I mean, not everyone sees the entities, but when people do, they usually, they have some commonalities. There's even books linking very old things, because sometimes rarely it's the case that some humans have endogenous DMT that is increased, and then linking that to like old fairy stories from Ireland, and linking it to alien abduction stories from the US when we went to the moon, and so on, and seeing that there's a lot of commonalities in those stories, and that it's probably just people having a spontaneous DMT trip without noticing it.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't tell us anything about what those entities are.
No. And also I know that there's a lot of theories. Maybe this is also already proven, but that like the Lucisian mysteries. I don't know if that's how exactly you say it, but it's like in the ancient Greece, there was this island that Socrates went, Plato went, Marcus Aurelius went, and they just go there to take a compound, like a cocktail, that is spiked with ergot.
Yes,
ergot is also the component that they derive LSD from. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing that Hoffman studied, and then that's how LSD 25 was created. So that's also very interesting, that maybe this like psychedelic field is related also to how our religions were born. And
do you know Graham Hancock?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he in his book Supernatural, he goes in further, and he's one of the people who claim that maybe religion and also maybe the human brain and our intelligence and how highly developed we are partly due psychedelics. The use of psychedelics.
The Stone Ape theory is also.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Joe Rogan really likes that one. But anyway, so Graham Hancock, he links actually some of the first cave paintings humans made to DMT, I think it was. So there's this other guy who made a catalog of symbols that people see frequently on DMT, which is actually independent from time, culture, age, and so on. So people just see those symbols. Yeah. And then Graham Hancock, and they found them in cave paintings that are about 13,000 years old, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So meaning that the shamans were probably tripping and basically documenting their experiences of that. And this could have had huge impacts on religion, for example, but maybe also on the development of the human brain.
Right. I mean, it definitely sparks neuroplasticity and opens up critical periods, and there's a lot of interesting research with that as well, like how it is able, some of these compounds, especially if they're used with the right setting, that is absolutely necessary, they can spark like huge changes in the chemical structure and the wiring of the brain itself. So I would not be surprised if they were involved, because it's entirely possible that some people in the ancient times, they were walking and they saw these mushrooms, they just ate it, and then something happened, they liked it, so they went back and get it again.
It wouldn't be surprising at all. Even, for example, when it comes to religion, I guess whatever you believed before, you can also create new beliefs. But if you already believe in some kind of God, well, if you have a deep psychedelic experience, it's Yeah, well, not unlikely that you will
You will
feel
see
like, oh,
something. Yeah, exactly.
this is the God I believe in. I finally saw him, you know, and you'll believe even more. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's interesting. So what are some of your favorite topics with this? And since we are in Amsterdam, have you tried truffles here, which are completely legal?
um, well, that was two questions at once. So
Yes.
there's a lot of topics to go into. I mean, I'm working in this field basically, and it's also growing continuously. There's just so many mysteries. I mean, in my, I guess in my personal life and then conversations, a lot of the things we don't understand and that aren't really easy or even possible to study are some of the most interesting things, like the entities, for example. But then in the professional field, the more obvious things, such as the exact clinical benefits, is probably more important, at least for now, because that's how we start this thing, going from clinical to less clinical. And if we
Yeah,
proved
more
that it works
recreational.
with treatment-resistant depression very well and is very safe, maybe then
Then
at
you can
some
go just
point,
normal depression.
exactly,
Yeah.
and then hopefully we can go on even further from there and also help people who don't need to have serious mental illnesses, but who just would like to work on themselves.
Yeah. Have a new
he-
direction for their lives or whatever.
Exactly. You know, you don't need to have complex PTSD to have some difficult childhood experiences or trauma that you could probably use some help healing with. Yeah. And about the truffles question, yeah, I did try truffles in Amsterdam. I mean, it's yeah, just the reason that it's legal is very. In that sense, you are definitely way more progressive than we are in Switzerland because I think we're still far away from
Mm.
having a similar, yeah, similar setting.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, it's not just a question of it being legal or illegal, but it's also a question of how it's then actually being treated when it's legal. Because sometimes in Amsterdam, it's really easy to just walk in a smart shop and buy truffles. And they will usually ask you, do you have experience? Have you had truffles before? But if you tell them yes, they usually just give them to you and they're like, oh, you have to take enough to make sure you feel it. And that's basically it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's also sometimes almost too easy to get them, you know?
I get what you mean, yeah.
Like, it's important that we still treat them with enough respect.
Yeah, because they are super powerful, these compounds.
Yes,
And
and
people
a
can-
lot of people are not aware at all of
Yeah.
what they're getting into. I mean,
Yeah,
for example,
and
for
they
me
are
it would
not
be
ready
something else.
for getting into
Yes,
also.
for me it would be something else because I did my own research and I know the field and so
Yeah.
on. But if you're just naively going to Amsterdam and someone is like, oh, let's go take truffles, it's legal, but you have no clue what you're getting yourself into, man.
Yeah,
I mean, you
you're
know
in
what I
for a
mean?
ride.
Like, yeah, like it can still end up as a nice experience, and probably most cases will, but still, it's dangerous in the way.
Yeah, it
sense
can
that-
also get pretty fucked up pretty fast.
Yeah, it's just dangerous if it's not treated with respect,
Yeah.
and I think we should be careful with that, even though.
So let's talk about this. This is a great topic, I
yeah.
think. What are some of the things that people should be aware of before, let's say, they are trying truffles or any psychedelics in general? But we can focus on truffles, or because that is what I think is relevant, most relevant here
Yes.
in Amsterdam. So what would you tell someone who is about to do their first trip or they are planning to?
Well, I would recommend them to do it with someone who has already experience and who they trust. I think that's
Have a
probably the
trip
most
sitter.
important thing. Yeah, even if the trip sitter trips
also-
themselves, it's a completely different setting if it's just, let's say, a friend group of 5 people who never did anything like this and have zero experience, or if there's a person who's actually experienced, who know what they're getting into, who probably know how to deal with some situations that arise that can be difficult. And also the trust, like if they don't feel safe in the group they're taking it with, well, then it's not a good idea. I think it's not going to work out well.
Yeah.
So those two, the combination of those two would be great. Of course, there's a lot more things to set and setting, but if they're taking it with someone who actually has experience and knows what they're doing, that will probably already be taken care of without them actually having to think of all that. You know what I mean?
Person will be aware, like, hey, we need to go to a place where we feel safe.
That person will hopefully be checking the weather, will hopefully be checking, okay, maybe we go somewhere where there's not that many people. Yeah. Maybe we bring some water with us, something to eat, you know, and be a little bit prepared. Exactly. Instead of just being like, oh yeah, why not? And then we can still see whatever we need while we're on the truffles. Well, no, that's not a good idea.
No.
And then the other thing that people who, like, if you don't know a lot about psychedelics, I imagine, there's still this idea of it being a drug. And we have this image of drugs as we know them. For example, most people know alcohol, and many people know weed, especially in the Netherlands, let's say. But this image of drugs as being sedative, of numbing your mind, of closing your mind down. So if you only know this type of drug and you think psychedelics will be somewhat like that, maybe more intense, well, it's just not true, because it's more like the opposite.
Yeah.
The idea of it being a drug, in that sense, it would more be like an anti-drug, in my opinion. That the sense, for example, let's take alcohol. So you can take alcohol to distract yourself from your life, to numb yourself down, right? So you can run away from your problems. Well,
but when
truffles,
you take psychedelics, they will give your problems into your face.
Exactly.
Like, hey, this is what you need to do.
Exactly. It's the opposite. Instead of closing your consciousness so you can distract yourself and run away, for example, it opens it. So you're actually more aware of many things, you know?
The demons in the closet.
It can actually confront you with the stuff that you've been avoiding. So it's the opposite. That's also probably one of the reasons why it's so effective to treat addictions.
Yeah.
It's exactly the opposite, you know?
Yeah, with ibogaine, they have a lot of things, right? With opioids.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the opposite. Imagine some other drugs are easy to get addicted to because exactly they let you run away from your life. And then the problem is probably deeper, in the way that something is not that nice in your life, but you don't want to face it, you don't want to see it, and so on. But psychedelics, well, they do the opposite. They show you whatever you have to work on. And, well, then probably, in my opinion, that may also be why they could be so helpful with addictions. So it's the opposite. Instead of getting addicted to psychedelics, it may actually help with other addictions.
Yeah.
But that's because it opens consciousness instead of closing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's also good if you give like a definition, kind of, because I heard this, the psychedelics are mind manifesting, which is a really good term, I think. It comes from the Greek, I think, from the Greek word.
Yeah.
I don't know which one. But anyways, and they are entheogens, right? Like
Indigenous?
No, the entheogens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Well, there's many. I don't really know how to pronounce it right now, but there's many names.
But the point is that they are, in fact, like the opposite of drugs. Just to clarify this, that you just said.
Okay.
They are also like drugs in the sense of altering your consciousness, right? Like if that's how you define drugs, they are definitely drugs for sure, because you will be in a different dimension. Yes. But it is more so on the opening side. And I know a Hungarian psychologist who studied this a lot, Andrew Felmer. He also studied it back when it was kind of more legal in Hungary.
Okay.
And he had some bad experiences with that. There was one guy who jumped out of a building on an LSD trip, and they were there also, the psychologists, and it was like a nice setting, but they went out of the room, and then because like I don't know why exactly, but then this guy just thought that now it's rebirth time, and then he just jumped out the window. It's kind of put an end to everything psychedelics related in the country. But anyways, and he talks about this also, that it's not. It shouldn't be called a drug.
Yeah, exactly. Because you feel
something else.
Yes. Because if you think of that, well, you think of something that closes your mind. It's the opposite that makes you,
Yeah, and I think it's also important for people to be aware of this before they take it.
Exactly,
The biases that you have towards it, and the beliefs that you have towards it will really influence. Just like with cannabis, I feel like the way you go into the experience, and I think with everything, right?
Yeah.
But those beliefs will strongly influence how the trip turns out. Like, for example, especially if you're having like a bad trip and you start to get anxious, you will get more anxious and more and more. And it's like a circle that you probably that's why it's good to be with some experienced person,
Exactly.
because they will be able to, okay, relax, take a couple deep breaths.
It's
gonna
fine.
be okay.
It can be like, oh, wait, what? I have the control over my mind. It's actually not that bad. Wow,
Yeah.
that was so easy. Yeah. That's I totally agree. It's really not the same thing. That's why I prefer, and I think many people would agree with me, to not use the term drug in this context, but just talk about psychedelic substances, for example.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the psychedelic substances that you know of?
There's so many. I mean,
The main things.
the
What you
the
think is the
main
most important in the renaissance of?
psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA. We already talked about those.
Yeah.
DMT and ayahuasca are really important as well, but also I guess ayahuasca, well, LSD, psilocybin, and MDMA are more, I guess, more important in Western cultures, and more also, well, it's also less this ritual ceremonic setting as it is with ayahuasca. But then again, psilocybin has also been used in Mexico, I think, and some other countries.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And for a longer period of time, of course, because it's just mushrooms, which is also a weird concept, by the way, to make a plant that's just growing like that illegal. But yeah, let's not get into that.
Yeah.
So it's just like if you're picking mushrooms and you pick the wrong mushroom, it's highly illegal. But if you pick the next mushroom that grows next to it, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind
of weird concept.
Yeah. You're basically making nature an illegal thing.
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't exist.
A lot of things.
Of course.
Yeah, it's and I also think that governments should give this opportunity for people to do whatever they want with their consciousness, as long as they are not harming others with their actions. I feel like people should be treated as people who can make their own decisions.
It's just difficult whenever you take the pharma industry into account.
Yeah, of course, and the politics.
Yes.
Linked.
There's so many people who have their own agenda and want to make money, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And what are some of the things that you see looking forward, maybe with your association or with Alps or with Switzerland? Where do you guys want to take this? And also for your personal life, like what do you want to do later in the future?
I think it's just a very exciting time for this field. It's really sad that it was basically stopped for so long, but now it's really being reborn. I mean, we didn't really talk about it yet during the podcast, but the term psychedelic renaissance is used a lot. And I think you can really see this in many areas nowadays. Also, for example, how the media talks about it. It's not only the research growing, right, and the therapy growing, but also the media portrayal. Like in the last 5 or 10 years, out of nowhere, it starts to be more and more positive everywhere. Whereas before, it was like very this bad thing and how it damages the youth and everything. So that's really changing. Or for example, another thing, Netflix started this series, what it's called, How to Change Your Mind. Yeah, exactly.
From Poland's book.
Yeah. Netflix is mainstream streaming, like video streaming platform. Exactly. So that means something, you know what I mean?
That means a lot.
It wouldn't have been like that 20 years ago, I'm sure.
I'm also sure, yeah. Also, Andrew Huberman talks about this, that he couldn't have talked about this.
Exactly, yeah.
Because it would have ruined his career.
Yes.
But now he can openly talk about on his podcast how he went through MDMA therapy, how it made him a better person, how it helped him to, be more open and be more, just enjoy life better. And they can have a conversation about the clinical uses and the trials that are going on. It's great. People are more and more knowledgeable, I think, and also accepting the fact that these compounds actually work and they are worthy of research.
Yes.
And we should be researching this in order to advance humanity in terms of consciousness and healing all kinds of the scars of the collective, I think.
Exactly. And also that something probably went wrong with the war on drugs and that it wasn't just, that there weren't probably good reasons. Or that there were other reasons behind it, and that it's good to rethink this whole thing of having psychedelics being Schedule 1 substances with no potential medical use.
Yeah, exactly.
And big potential for abuse, which is both not true. But so, but let's get back to the future and my plans. So Yeah, this is really exciting, and I think there's a lot of new things happening, new jobs, for example, opening up. I can really see this field growing a lot as it is at the moment already, and it's just very exciting to be at the forefront of riding this wave of the psychedelic renaissance, especially in Switzerland. And yeah, for example, as we talked about earlier, the lack of education at universities around psychedelics, that would be perfect for new job opportunities. Also, the growing amount of therapists and so on. But for example, myself, I would really see myself in there, for example, doing research and teaching about the research at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing that you would like to do.
Yeah.
In Switzerland specifically?
I think so, yeah. If I can find a nice PhD position. Yeah. Now that I finished my master's.
Okay. And what is like something that you would love to research? Like if you could research anything and I give you unlimited amounts of money, what would you do?
I would love to... Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think I would love to research something non-clinical, definitely. Like something about consciousness or about cognition, for example, how... Let's say how LSD influences your memory, for example. Or how it influences social interactions. And then long-term studies, for example.
I think one thing is also really interesting from my perspective, and maybe you can also resonate with this because I know you're also a musician yourself, is music and these compounds. Because I know for a fact that in the clinical guide for psilocybin, specifically psilocybin, you need to have music in order to get the most benefit from these from the sessions, which is, I think, really fascinating. So there's a difference if you hear something that is musical and there's a journey to it, and there's a difference if you're just in silence in terms of how much
very
benefit
true. Yeah.
So it can be really interesting how music affects the mind during the
exactly.
Or how like playing music, for example,
and which kind of music. There's so much things to go into, and then is it different from substance to substance? And what about groups, right? But there's around the individual and group therapies is already research happening, but this is also really interesting. Is it the same thing if you go through it alone, or if you basically share this experience with other people who also go through something similar?
Interesting stuff, for sure.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. I think we need more researchers, like in this field. There's a lot of breakthroughs going to happen, I think, in the next couple of years.
I'm sure. Yeah. Really excited for it too. Yeah.
Is there anything that you think we should discuss?
I mean, there's many things we could still discuss, but I guess we covered most of the central topics.
Yeah.
We could go, if you want to, we can go into more of the psychedelic renaissance, for example.
Sure, let's go into it. So, for people who are not aware of it, there was a large war on drugs in the US in the 1960s mainly. 50s already started a little bit. And actually, I think the first psilocybin came into the US at about like 1954 or 55, something like that, when a larger business guy went down to Mexico. He was looking for the mushrooms. He had a transformational trip, and then he kind of like started to initiate this.
I don't know about the years, but
and then there was a lot of research. We know Richard Alpert, who is now Ram Dass.
Yes.
He was on Harvard, and there was the other guy who was tune-in, dropout. Who is him? Do you remember his name?
Yeah. Was it Huxley?
No. Huxley was.
No, it was Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary, exactly. Yes. So they were two Harvard professors who were doing trips with the students in the 1950s.
That's smuggling stuff.
It's crazy.
But I mean, that's also the whole hippie era of the 60s.
Exactly. And then also Shulgin with his with MDMA. So he was creating it synthetically first time, and then he started to host people like psychotherapists and psychology-oriented people, therapists, etc. He started to host these MDMA parties where they would get high and just dance, hug and listen to music, all these things. And then they started to do this underground therapy when it was still legal, but then it got to the streets and then it became a party drug. And then it became illegal.
That's what always happens, right? But that's also the reason why I said that I think you have to treat them with respect, because legalizing is probably a good way forward, but it's not everything. You know what I mean? Because we don't want to end up in I'm sure that we won't end up in the same thing as the hippie era, where it really escalated in some ways. But we also have to be careful of that, you know, because there's a lot of potential in it. But also, well, as everything, it's like a double-edged sword. You know what I mean? It can be, there's a lot of potential, but it can be used in good and bad ways in that sense.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the psychedelic renaissance did the really interesting things you mentioned already. But then with the war on drugs, basically, so research stopped. Almost all research stopped except for some animal studies for about 20 years. Until in the 90s, it started coming back slowly. And since then, it's been growing every year. And in the last, I think, 4 years, since 2019, the number of studies published on psychedelics each year doubled.
Okay.
In a 4-year time frame.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's already been growing, you know, exponentially, like increasingly faster and faster. But that's even way more than the speed before. So right now it's really the time where everything's exploding. I feel like more than ever before.
It's really interesting, and I think it also because a lot of people who are high-level entrepreneurs, they are talking about how the substances help them to come up with better business strategies, or so it's also good for entrepreneurs, but also veterans are talking about how it was able to help them with PTSD, which is really valuable also for the Congress, you know, because the US is really involved with the military, and then also alcoholists people. So it's like it's useful for a wide range of people, and I think that's why there's such a large amount of research, because you can research anything with this, how it affects any cognition, how it affects any specific disorder.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways people can go with this.
And that's also why you would expect when you study psychology to be able to learn about it, because it's, well, if it opens doors, for example, to the unconscious, well, it's like a way to study the things that you want to know about, you know, even though there's so many things you could go into. But yeah, we talked about why it's not the case yet.
Yeah, yet. But and I think it's also here, it's not the case. You know, I'm studying here only first year. And I think there's like one period, so like maybe 8 weeks of study on drugs that alter the mind.
Yes.
But it's not specifically psychedelics. It's going to be all kinds of drugs. And maybe psychedelics will get like one lecture.
Exactly,
you know? Through 3 years of studying psychology, you know, which I think is insane.
Just like mentioned on the side. You know, there are under the most promising therapies there are, and also interesting for all other types of understanding the psyche.
Yeah, exactly.
And still, it's just like treat it as if it doesn't exist. But as we said, this might change. I can see it being very differently.
I'm 100% sure
in a
that
decade,
this will
2
change.
decades.
Yeah. I think especially in the now the countries where it's already prominent, there's already research. Yeah. I think university education and this type of things will shift into the direction of this will be like a master's, or like, you know, you can.
That would be so cool.
Have a journey of, okay, you just want to be like a psychedelic researcher or psychedelic therapist, and there will be like a clear path for you to follow. Yeah. Which I think it should be like that already, but we can talk about why that's not the case. But I think it will change for sure, because there's such a large context of how it's useful. And as you said, like with the psychology, you want to study the psyche, and these substances can truly like show you how, for example, your beliefs influence your reality. If you have a personal experience with tripping on truffles, whatever you trip on, you can really see how your cognitive biases shape your reality and how your thinking pattern, your feeling, and all this. Like,
you can get a new perspective on the same thing and on yourself. I think that's a really important part as well. The fact that you can get away from your ego to a certain point to be able to kind of see yourself from the outside for maybe the first time, which can be really crucially important. And the other thing that is probably really important, in my opinion, is that we're always, like in the normal consciousness, so focused on problem solving, achieving goals, and thinking. It's so rational, everything. You just think through it, you know? Like if you have a problem, you try to rationally solve it. But then the psychedelic experience is more about feeling it, experiencing it. It's not about, like, that's also the weird thing to putting it into words. because you can explain to someone what you experienced on a psychedelic experience, and they will be like, oh yeah, so you experienced this, nice, you know. But it's the feeling of having gone through it, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
having
like
changed.
Yeah, it's like having a really interesting, important, cool quote, but once you lived through that experience, you know what it really means.
Yeah.
Even if you heard it 100 times before, it's not the same thing.
No.
Yeah. And I think that's why one of the things that is really valuable about psychedelics is actually experiencing something, actually going through the emotions and feeling it instead of just thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's a different level of understanding.
Exactly. And I think that's also really important with the negative feelings that someone might have.
Yeah.
That they are not ready to feel through.
That's very true.
Because like there's I don't know if you know this guy, Artur Yanov. He has a couple books written, like Primal Scream, Primal
I don't think
Healing.
so. No.
He made an entire like approach to healing certain ailments, like disorders, mental health issues, etc.
Yeah.
And he wrote this, and I think you will agree, and also like Bessel van der Kolk, you know, The Body Keeps the Score. Do you know this book?
No,
it was like,
I don't think so.
It's a really interesting. Okay, so we can talk about this too, for example, just a little bit to understand why it's good to feel through the bad trip, you know, and feel through the negative experience.
Yes.
So like Janov talks about how feeling the experience that you initially repressed, right? Maybe you were a child and you had some issues and etc., negative feeling, a shock, a trauma. What do? Of course, you repress it. That's the first reaction of the psyche, right? Because you don't want to feel
run away.
That fear all the time, right?
You hide it in a box.
You hide it, exactly. But then all through the years of repression, it's still there. It's still under your bed, or
it
under the
influences
covers, you know?
your whole behavior and your anxiety level and so on. Yeah.
Subconsciously your level of hyperarousal, you know, you're all the time in a state of anxiety or whatever it may be, especially for people who are like, for example, in major depression, you know, they might have an underlying thing that they can't deal with, and that's why they're in hyperarousal, and that's why it influences their entire cognition and feeling and etc. But if they open up the lid, and through that experience, they can feel through the things and see it from a different perspective. You know, that's why ketamine, for example, is really beneficial for treatment-resistant depression and people who've been abused and these kinds of things, because it dissociates them. It's literally a dissociative. It dissociates them from the trauma itself, and then they can see it from a different lens and put it outside of their consciousness.
It's also with MDMA and PTSD. It's basically that. It's just like you have those traumatic experiences and you didn't like fully heal yet, but then you probably just live through some of them again in a kind of safe bubble of MDMA.
Yeah.
And because it could be too painful to bring them up.
Yeah.
When you're sober, but then you just it allows you to access it and go through it again, and then you kind of feel it like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's also interesting how that points to the huge difference from, for example, psychedelics and antidepressants. Because
antidepressants increases the repression.
It's basically just it's like
it numbs you for the feeling.
Yes,
that you
it's
want
just it's not solving the underlying problem usually, but it's just treating the symptoms.
Yeah.
And the symptoms are just there because there's something wrong. You know, the symptoms are telling you, "Hey, man, you really need to change something. Yeah. Something is going downhill. It's not good."
Yeah.
And then the antidepressants are like, "Oh, it's fine. Yeah. You don't need to change anything. It's fine. This all this pain and all this shit you're carrying with you, it can just stay there. It's okay."
Yeah, exactly. You can just take this pill and not feel it.
You can't even access it anymore, even less, you know, than before.
Exactly.
You don't even feel it.
It's fucked up. But I heard for some people it's like actually really good to start the healing process, you know. So
yes, and I'm not saying that it doesn't. Yes, definitely, especially let's say
2% of the people who actually take it now.
Yeah, and especially, let's say if you're suicidal or something like that, and it can save people's lives.
For sure.
I'm not saying it doesn't have any use, definitely.
Yeah. But I think it takes away the opportunity for self-actualization from people, because to be your full self, you need to also integrate these darker elements of sadness, anger, you know, all these kinds of things that people would usually try to repress.
Yeah.
Especially because there's a lot of like also social stigma around certain stuff, and you know, like people naturally put that away because it might not get acceptance from the tribe, you know. We can also go into this, like this is a bit of more on the evolutionary and social, like what is the reason behind. For example, like if somebody is like, I know for a fact that girls, they are better at this, like mimicking behavior, right? So that's why, for example, girls are being less diagnosed with ADHD because they are more at mimicking behavior than the young guys who are, you know, rashing out all the time.
It shows in different ways then,
Yeah. And so I think that if you take that away and we allow people to feel whatever they need to feel and just be themselves in that setting and go through it, that can lift a lot of their problems and drive self-acceptance. And then through that, they can actually evolve in their natural trajectory of human experience.
Yeah, I agree. And also, well, it may allow in some cases to even, well, it's a difficult thing to confront yourself with that negative stuff, the negative feelings, the hurt you experienced and so on. And then sometimes it allows you to confront that stuff or to even feel it and to bring it up when you wouldn't be able to do it otherwise.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful experience also.
Very, yeah. That's also the weird thing about so-called bad trips, because there's
no bad trips.
Well, probably not. Not really. I mean, most of the trips are just challenging trips that are called bad trips, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that there could be a bad trip in the sense of you're just so overwhelmed with negative emotions and let's say going down.
Like you can see your negative emotions.
Yeah, or just going down a paranoia thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That you don't even realize why. And then it's like, well, the challenging or bad trip probably would have showed you something, but you were too occupied with the emotion to even see it.
Exactly. And maybe some people are not even ready for actually seeing the things. That's why I think there's a...
Yeah, it can be...
It's good to prepare for the trip, especially if it's your first time, you know.
Yes.
You want to sober up and you want to clear, you go through some detoxing elements. And also like mentally, I feel like, because we're consuming so much content, so much influences we have, that we are so busy with everything outside, we cannot be more like introspective. So I think, like, for example, a meditation practice is like absolutely foundational if you want to get the best out of the trips.
And I also feel integration afterwards is really important.
Yeah, exactly. We can talk about that as well.
Forgot a lot.
Integration, what does that mean?
Well, the thing is, you may realize a lot of things about your life that could be nice and that you can work on or whatever it is, and that are really beneficial in a way, but it's just theory if you don't implement it, you know. And if you don't, well, for example, in psychedelic therapy, there's usually integration sessions after the trips where you discuss those changes and you discuss how what you learn from the trip and what that means for your life. But I think it would also be valuable if people just do that in general, depending on how they use psychedelics, of course, but it lets them take way more from the insights of it than to just, because otherwise it's just maybe an insightful, beautiful experience, but completely independent from their life. Completely different. But if you try to integrate it and think about it again, write about it, talk about it, and then think about how those things can actually be tackled and changed or worked on or whatever you want to take from the trip, then, well, it can be much more effective in actually changing something about your life.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention and to be aware of, because also the clinical settings and the clinical trials that are being done, for example, I know that with psilocybin, they are very aware of the having like, I'm not sure about the exact number, but let's say like 6 therapy sittings with the person, one-on-one, just with the therapist, before the experience, right?
Oh, yeah.
To generate trust, go through it's like a preparation phase. And then they have one trip. They usually use 2.5 grams of 25 milligrams of psilocybin.
Okay.
And then, because they found that's the best, they tried heroic, they tried micro, but this is like, this is from Huberman. So they have a session where it's psychedelics, and then they have like integration for like 4 sessions or 6 more sessions. Yes. And then they have another clinically, like, you know, settings, clinically set psychedelic use. Yeah. Which could be MDMA, psilocybin, whatever. And then there's another integration.
So it's like, beautiful.
It's really important. And people see that the most results are actually if they are doing it this way. Do you have anything with this? Like, how do you, for example, if you have a truffle strip in Amsterdam where it's completely legal. How did you integrate the experience?
I haven't really done that much integration in that sense. That, but I think, well, it depends if it's used for a clinical reason to actually really heal something, or for other reasons. But I guess meditation in my case is really, really useful, and having a community you can talk about it with, which is also a good thing about what we're doing with the student associations, for example. So having other people who actually are interested in it, and you can share your experiences with in a safe setting, maybe without being looked at as some lunatic or something like that. Because I think that's also a problem with some people doing individual therapy. Let's say you're in your 40s or 50s and you don't have any friends or family who ever have had anything to do with psychedelics, and then you make this life-changing experience and no one understands you. No one.
No one.
No one. Not even your therapist, maybe, you know?
Yeah.
And that's that can be really difficult, I think. But in the group setting, that's not well, that issue
takes
is
care
better.
of it. Yeah. Huh, interesting. Also, I think there's, if you think about like group setting, during those transformative experiences, you can create connections much deeper with people, actually, because you are so open to discussing whatever, or just talking, hearing the other also. You're more in the present, because it takes away the default mode network, basically. So you're not thinking about what you will do, where should you go, what is your goal. Exactly. You're just like being in the moment. And I think that can be really good if you're surrounded with people who are also going through that same experience. That's why maybe group therapy is a really good...
Yes.
Do you have any info on that?
I mean, from what I know, people who participate in the group settings also wish to stay friends with the other participants after the actual therapy, which is already very interesting, and well, it speaks for itself, I guess, that those are meaningful connections formed, and that it's maybe a better way of therapy.
Awesome. I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah.
Right? It was a really good conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Grateful to be here.
Good that you came in, man.